The evening had a calm softness to it, the kind that made the small music hall feel even warmer than usual. People were still arriving, taking off coats, greeting friends, and settling into their seats. It was the kind of local event where everyone seemed to know someone, and even strangers felt like they belonged. The wooden floor creaked gently under their steps, and the smell of old curtains and polished instruments floated in the air. In the corner, near the entrance, a young woman stood quietly with a small bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't dress like someone ready to perform. She wore plain clothes, the kind you would expect on someone who came just to listen instead of step onto a stage. Her hair was tied back loosely, and her shoes were simple. Nothing about her appearance suggested confidence or experience. And maybe that was why most people didn't look twice at her at the sign-up table. She waited patiently while a couple of performers finished joking with the event volunteer. They laughed loudly about their last performance, bragging about how they got the biggest applause of the night. When they finally moved aside, the woman stepped forward and gently wrote her name on the list. Her handwriting was neat, small, almost shy. The volunteer gave her a quick glance, then smiled politely. "You're playing piano, right?" he asked. She nodded. She didn't say much, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't feel the need. She thanked him softly and stepped away, letting the next person come forward. At the far end of the hall, a young man stood with a group of his friends. He held his chin up, confidence in every movement. He was known in the area for playing fast, complicated piano pieces that showed off his skill. The crowd liked him because he entertained them. He liked the crowd because he liked being admired. When he saw the young woman leave the sign-up table, he nudged the person next to him. "Look who's playing after me," he whispered with a smirk. "I bet she'll play something simple. Maybe a little tune from a beginner book." His friends chuckled quietly. It wasn't loud enough for her to hear, but it was loud enough for him to enjoy. He didn't mean to be cruel. He was simply used to feeling superior. In his mind, talent always showed itself on the outside. If someone looked uncertain, they must not know much. The young woman didn't notice their whispers. She found a seat near the side wall, close enough to watch the stage, but far enough to avoid attention. She placed her bag beside her and folded her hands in her lap. Her eyes stayed on the piano, an old upright instrument with scratches on the sides, but a warm tone that filled the room nicely. She watched each performer touch the keys. Noticing how differently everyone approached the instrument, a soft murmur filled the hall as more people arrived. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the event would begin soon. The young man in the group cracked his knuckles and stretched his fingers dramatically, making sure his friends noticed. One of them slapped him on the back and wished him luck, even though they all believed he didn't need it. The host of the event walked onto the stage with a cheerful smile and welcomed everyone. He thanked the community for supporting live music and encouraged everyone to relax and enjoy the night. People clapped, some enthusiastically, others out of habit. The first performer went up, singing a soft acoustic song. The next one played a violin piece that echoed beautifully through the hall. The atmosphere grew warmer with each performance, the crowd settling deeper into their seats. The young woman listened to all of them carefully, her expression calm. She wasn't nervous yet. She wasn't even excited. She was simply present, letting the music from each performer pass over her like a breeze. As the evening continued, the young man's turn approached. His friends straightened in their seats, ready to cheer loudly for him. He stepped onto the stage with a slight swagger, bowing with extra flair. The crowd laughed lightly, enjoying his confidence. He sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and ran his fingers lightly across the keys. Then, without hesitation, he launched into a complicated piece full of fast notes and showy runs. His hands moved quickly, creating a storm of sound that filled the hall. People clapped along as he finished certain sections. Clearly entertained, he glanced toward the young woman at the side wall once, expecting to see her nervous or impressed. But she was simply watching, her face steady, her hands resting calmly in her lap. When he finished, the audience clapped loudly. He stood, bowed again with the same theatrical energy, and walked off the stage with a proud grin. His friends congratulated him with pats on the back. "Let's see if the next one can follow that," he said softly. smirking in the young woman's direction, but she didn't react. She rose from her seat gently when her name was called. She picked up her small bag, placed the strap over her shoulder, and walked toward the stage with quiet steps. She wasn't trying to make an entrance. She wasn't trying to impress anyone before she even sat down. She simply walked with an inner calm that no one recognized yet. Some people in the audience continued whispering to each other, not paying much attention as she climbed the few steps to the stage. She sat down at the piano slowly, adjusting the bench without rushing. A few audience members used the break to sip water or check their phones. She placed her bag under the bench and rested, her hands lightly on her knees. Her breath came soft, steady. The young man leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he watched. He expected something quiet, something forgettable, something that would make the crowd shift in their seats, waiting for the next act. On stage, the young woman lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. The hall wasn't completely silent. Whispers and small sounds still floated around. Someone laughed lightly in the back row. A chair creaked. A phone screen lit up, but then she took a slow breath and touched the first key. That single note echoed through the hall in a way no one expected. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't meant to shock. But it carried a kind of emotion that didn't need volume to be felt. It seemed to vibrate in the wooden floors and travel through the air like something alive. The whispers stopped. The laughter faded. Even the people looking at their phones lifted their heads. The young man sat up straight, without realizing he had moved. Something about the sound felt different. It wasn't just music. It was a feeling, a memory, a quiet kind of strength wrapped inside a single tone. The woman paused after that first note, letting it settle. Her fingers hovered above the keys, as if waiting for the right moment to move again. The audience watched closely now, their attention shifting slowly and fully to her. She closed her eyes. Not to appear dramatic, but because it helped her connect to what she was about to play. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about the crowd, the young man's laughter, the whispers around her. She was thinking about the music that had stayed in her heart for years. The melody that held memories, the one she had played countless times in private but never in front of people. The one that carried the voice of someone she once admired deeply as she prepared to play the next note. The hall seemed to wait with her. No one expected her to surprise them. No one expected her to be anything more than a shy performer with a simple tune. But something in the air was already changing. The young woman opened her eyes again, breathed out softly, and let her fingers fall gently onto the keys. The room that once doubted her was now silent, completely silent, as the first soft melody began to form, and though no one knew it yet, the sound she was about to create would stay with them long after the night was over. The moment after the young woman touched that first note, the room seemed to shift in a way that everyone felt but couldn't explain. It was as if the air became still, waiting to see what she would do next. Even she could feel it. The sound lingered gently, like a slow-moving ripple on calm water. She kept her hands on the keys but didn't rush. She knew that music wasn't something to spill out all at once. It had to breathe, just like people did. So she let the quiet settle, and placed her fingers back down with steady care. Her next notes were soft and slow, almost like a whisper. They weren't flashy or loud. They didn't race across the keys the way the young man's performance had earlier. Instead, they moved gently, touching each corner of the room with a quiet warmth. The kind of warmth that made people stop whatever they were doing and listen without even realizing it. A couple sitting near the back leaned forward. A man in the third row lowered the drink he was holding. The host, who had been flipping through the sign-up list for the next performer, lifted his head and stared at her as if noticing her for the first time. Even the young man who had mocked her earlier felt a strange feeling rise in his chest. At first he couldn't name it. But then he realized it was surprise, real surprise, the kind that made him sit up straighter without meaning to. She continued playing, her hands gliding across the piano like she had practiced for years. But there was something different about the way she played. She didn't force anything. She didn't try to show off or push the melody louder than it needed to be. She simply followed the feeling inside her, and that feeling grew deeper with each note. Her melody carried, soft sadness mixed with a quiet courage. It felt like a memory being retold through sound. Not a loud or dramatic memory, but one that came from a place inside her that she rarely opened. A few people in the audience glanced at each other, not sure why the music felt so familiar even though they had never heard it before. It was the kind of tune that seemed to speak directly to the part of a person that didn't need words. On stage, the young woman kept her eyes partly closed. Not tightly shut, just soft enough to let her focus sink inward. She wasn't thinking about the people watching. She wasn't thinking about whether she would impress anyone. She wasn't thinking about the young man who doubted her or the jokes whispered behind her back. She was remembering someone who had taught her to play, not with speed but with heart. Someone who had once told her that a single note, if played with truth, could touch a person more deeply than 1,000 perfect ones. She could still hear that voice in her memory, calm and patient, guiding her hands across the keys all those years ago. Those lessons had stayed with her. Even after the person was gone, the audience didn't know any of that. But they felt something in her music that made them forget the noise of the world for a moment. It made their shoulders relax, their breathing slow. It made them feel connected not just to her, but to something in themselves. As she played, the melody shifted naturally. It grew a little fuller, a little stronger, like a story quietly building. Still simple, still pure, carrying more emotion with each passing measure in the group of friends sitting near the front. One of them whispered, "She's really good?" The young man didn't answer. He just kept staring at her hands, trying to understand how something that looked so effortless could feel, so powerful. He realized suddenly that he couldn't look away. The woman's fingers moved with a steady grace. She didn't use fast runs or dramatic jumps. She didn't pound the keys or force any part of the melody. She let the piano speak naturally, like she trusted it to tell the story for her. And the piano responded. The old instrument, scratched and worn from years of use, seemed to brighten under her touch. Its tone felt warmer, richer, almost as if it remembered something too. Every note she played filled the space gently but fully. The hall was small, and the sound didn't need to fight to reach the back. It moved softly through each row, settling into the ears and hearts of the people listening. The young woman's posture stayed relaxed. No tension in her shoulders, no stiffness in her hands. She wasn't trying to control the music. She was letting it guide her. The audience didn't know her story, but they didn't need to. They could feel something honest in the way she played. Something real. For a moment, even the young man felt small, not in a belittling way, but in a humbled way. He suddenly remembered how he used to play when he first learned. Back when he didn't care about impressing anyone. Back when he just wanted to make a sound he liked. He wondered when he had forgotten that. The melody reached a gentle rise, not a dramatic climax, but a soft moment of lifting emotion. The woman let the notes float upward, then gently eased them back down. Her hands slowed, her breathing deepened. People who had come expecting casual entertainment now sat with their full attention on her. They didn't clap yet. They didn't even think about clapping. They didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening. She continued playing, guiding the music into a warm, steady rhythm. Every now and then, a soft change in the melody would shift the feeling slightly. Not enough to break the atmosphere, but enough to keep the audience wrapped around each sound as she played. Her thoughts drifted through moments from her past quiet afternoons spent practicing. Small lessons learned the hard way. The gentle encouragement that had once pushed her to keep going even when she doubted. Her chest tightened for a second, not with sadness but with gratitude. She let that feeling flow into the next set of notes, giving them a depth that made the melody feel almost like a whisper from someone long gone. The young man felt that shift. It almost startled him. He glanced at his friends, but they were too absorbed to notice him looking. They weren't whispering now. They weren't laughing. They were watching her with full, quiet attention. He looked back at her, this time without any judgment. Something inside him softened a little. The young woman didn't notice any of that. She was still somewhere inside the music, letting her fingers speak the things she never said out loud. The audience could feel that even if they didn't fully understand it. Her melody slowed again, forming gentle waves of sound. It wasn't dramatic or complicated. It was peaceful and genuine, the kind of tune that touched people without demanding anything in return. A child sitting with his mother leaned against her arm, listening with wide eyes. An older man in the front row closed his eyes, letting the sound settle into memories of his own. A couple held hands a little tighter without realizing it. No one in the room expected this kind of performance. No one expected a young woman who walked in quietly, wearing simple clothes and carrying a plain bag, to hold the entire hall in silence with just her touch on the keys. But she did. She didn't rush toward the end of her piece. She let it unfold naturally, easing the melody into a softer rhythm. Her fingers slowed, her breath matched the pace, and the room seemed to breathe with her. The young man leaned forward, elbows on his knees, no longer thinking about his own performance or how well he had played earlier. He wasn't comparing anymore. He was simply listening. The woman lifted her hands gently near the end, playing the last few notes with a tenderness that made the melody feel like it was fading into the air itself. She held the final note longer than the others, letting it vibrate softly. It wasn't showy or dramatic. It was honest. Then she let her hands fall slowly to her lap. The room was still silent. No one moved. No one breathed loudly. The young woman didn't look up yet. She stayed still, letting the last echo settle. And in that quiet moment, something unspoken passed through the hall. Something gentle but unforgettable. No one expected what would come next. But everyone knew something inside them had already changed just from her first few moments on that stage. The room stayed completely still, as if everyone inside it had forgotten how to move. The last note she played hovered in the air like a soft echo, and for a moment even the lights seemed quieter. The young woman slowly lifted her gaze from the keys, her eyes calm, her breathing steady, but something inside her had shifted. She could feel it. The whole room could feel it. She didn't smile or straighten her posture to show confidence. She simply sat there, hands resting gently on her lap, letting the silence settle naturally. She wasn't in a hurry to get up. She wanted to stay inside the feeling of that final note for just a bit longer. The people in the audience looked at her almost as if they were seeing her for the first time. It was strange. Just minutes earlier, many of them had barely paid attention when she walked on stage. Now, she held the kind of presence usually reserved for seasoned performers who had spent years earning respect. In the middle rows, someone finally let out a slow breath. Another person whispered to their friend, but even that whisper was gentle, like they didn't want to disturb the moment. The young man who had played before her sat completely still. His arms were no longer crossed, and the confident expression he always wore had softened. He didn't know how to describe what he just heard. He only knew that it didn't feel like any performance he had ever listened to, not even from himself. She sat quietly for another second, then gently placed her hands back on the piano. The audience straightened in their seats, expecting maybe she wanted to play more. But instead, she closed the piano lid softly. With the same care she had shown in her music, she stood from the bench, her movements unhurried. She reached down, picked up her simple bag, and stepped back from the instrument. The audience didn't clap yet, not because they didn't want to, but because they almost didn't know if the moment was over. Then finally, someone near the right side started clapping slowly at first, but with genuine feeling. Another person joined in, then another, until the whole room filled with applause that grew louder and warmer with each passing second. The young woman paused, surprised by the intensity of it. She had expected polite claps, maybe a few nods of approval, but she had not expected this. People stood from their seats, offering her something she had not imagined when she walked in quietly at the start of the night. She didn't know where to look. She simply bowed her head slightly, shy but grateful. The applause continued. But eventually she made her way off the stage, stepping down each small stair carefully. As she walked toward the side of the hall, she felt dozens of eyes follow her. She didn't know what to do with that kind of attention, so she kept her steps gentle and steady. The host approached her with wide eyes and an excited smile. "That was beautiful," he said softly. She nodded politely, grateful for the kindness but unsure how to respond in a bigger way. Meanwhile, The young man who had performed earlier remained seated. His friends were whispering to each other, trying to process what they had just heard. "Did you see her hands?" one of them murmured. "I've never heard something like that," another whispered, but the young man didn't join in their conversation. He was too caught up in a swirl of emotions he didn't fully understand. He felt impressed. He felt humbled. He felt confused, even challenged in a way he hadn't felt in years. He remembered the things he had said earlier, the jokes he made, the way he dismissed her based on how she looked. Now those words felt heavy in his mind. After a long moment, he finally stood up. He didn't walk toward his friends. Instead, he stepped toward the path she had taken, moving slowly. As if unsure whether he should approach her at all, the young woman had found a quiet spot near the side wall again. She set her bag down and took a moment to breathe, almost overwhelmed by the intensity of the applause she had just received. She wasn't used to that kind of attention. She wasn't used to being seen so clearly. She was reaching into her bag for her water bottle.
Ow.
When she heard footsteps stop nearby, she looked up and saw the young man standing there. He didn't look confident now. He looked thoughtful, unsure, and a little nervous. "Hey," he said quietly. His tone was different from earlier, softer, almost careful. She gave a small nod in greeting. "That was something else," he continued. She wasn't sure how to respond, so she just said softly, "Thank you." He swallowed, trying to find the right words. He paused, then tried again. "I think I misjudged you earlier." The young woman didn't say anything. She waited. He finally looked her in the eyes. And for once, there was no arrogance in his expression. "I shouldn't have said what I said. I'm sorry." His apology was quiet but sincere. She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "It's okay," she said gently. He shook his head slightly. "No, it's not. But thank you." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something thoughtful. The young man glanced toward the stage, still hearing the melody she had played in his mind. "How long have you been playing?" He asked. She hesitated, not because it was a secret, but because the answer held more emotion than she usually spoke aloud. "Since I was small," she said quietly. He nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. "It shows," he murmured. She looked down shyly, her fingers tightening around her water bottle. "Your piece," he continued. He didn't finish the sentence, because he wasn't sure how to name the feeling it had given him. It felt personal, he said finally. She nodded once. "It is." The young man felt a small ache in his chest. He wondered about the story behind the melody. He wondered who had taught her, who she remembered when she played. But he didn't ask. Some things didn't need to be explained. He stepped aside slightly, giving her more space. "You're going to stay, right? To hear the rest of the performers?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." He gave a small smile. Not a proud one, not a flashy one, but a quiet, genuine one. Then he walked back toward his friends, who immediately started asking him questions. "What did she say?" One of them whispered. "Did you congratulate her?" Another asked. He didn't answer right away. He just sat down, letting the questions fade into the background. His mind was still on her music. The host returned to the stage and introduced the next performer. But it was clear the atmosphere of the room had changed. People were still talking about the young woman's playing. Even as new music started, soft whispers continued. "That was amazing. I didn't expect that from her. Do you think she's performed before? Where did she learn to play like that?" The young woman heard some of these whispers from where she sat, but she didn't react. She didn't play for praise. She played because the music inside her needed somewhere to go as the night went on. More performers came to the stage, each offering their own sounds and stories. The audience tried to focus, but it was clear many of them were still replaying her melody in their minds. At one point, a young man glanced over at her from across the room. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching the stage with quiet interest, just as she had before she played. But something about her was different now, because of the applause, but because she had finally shared a piece of her heart in a way she hadn't done before. The young man felt another stir of emotion he wasn't used to. It wasn't jealousy or frustration. It was admiration. For years he had believed that speed, complexity, and confidence were the marks of a great player. But tonight, someone who walked in unnoticed had shown him something else, that music wasn't about being impressive, it was about being honest, and that honesty had stopped an entire room in its tracks. The evening slowly reached its end. The final performer finished, and people began gathering their things. Still talking about the moment that had changed the atmosphere of the night, the young woman stood and picked up her bag again, preparing to leave quietly just as she had arrived. But this time, she wasn't invisible. The hall felt heavier that night, as if the air itself carried all the things left unsaid. The young woman stepped away from the piano after finishing the last note of her piece in part 3. And for a moment, she simply stood there, breathing quietly. The crowd had already given her their applause, but the sound still echoed inside her chest. She didn't smile. She didn't bow again. She only gave a small nod before walking off the stage. The young man, who had underestimated her earlier, sat frozen in his seat. His friends were whispering things to him, nudging his arm, trying to get his attention. But he didn't move. He didn't even blink for a few seconds. Something had shifted inside him, something he couldn't name yet. The music she played had touched something deep, something he hadn't felt in years. It bothered him, but not in a painful way, more in a way that made him question his own certainty. People started talking again, the room warming back up with soft chatter, but the young man barely heard anything. His eyes stayed locked on the empty stage, almost as if he expected her to return and sit down to play again. His fingers twitched slightly, the habit of someone used to touching piano keys when emotions ran high. But he didn't move from his chair. Backstage, a young woman placed her bag beside a small wooden table and sat down on a stool. Her hands rested in her lap, and she stared at them for a moment. They still trembled lightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of the memory she had just shared through music. The melody she played wasn't something she practiced often. It was something she carried deep inside, something tied to someone she once cared about. Every note she played felt like opening a door she kept closed for a long time. She let out a slow breath and closed her eyes. The room around her felt quiet, almost too quiet, but it gave her space to breathe. She could still feel the softness of the first note she played the moment the room fell silent. She didn't know if the audience truly understood the meaning behind her music, but she didn't expect them to. She played because she needed to, and somehow the room had understood enough. Meanwhile, the young man finally blinked. His chest rose with a deep inhale, like someone waking from a dream. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, trying to gather his thoughts. His friends kept talking, but he lifted a hand slowly to silence them. "Give me a second," he muttered. His voice didn't sound like it usually did. It had lost its playful edge, replaced with something thinner, something honest. His friends exchanged looks but stayed quiet. They weren't used to seeing him like this. He stood up slowly and glanced toward the backstage door. His steps were unsteady, but something inside him pushed him forward. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to say, or even why he felt the need to talk to her. All he knew was that something about her performance had shaken him awake as he walked through the hallway behind the stage. He felt a nervousness he never felt before, not during competitions, not during performances, not even during exams. This was different. This came from a place inside him he didn't recognize. The young woman heard footsteps approaching. She didn't look up at first. She thought it was just another performer coming back from the stage. But the sound of the steps grew slower, more hesitant. When she finally lifted her eyes, she saw him standing a few feet away. He didn't look as confident as he had earlier. His hands stayed in his pockets and his shoulders lowered slightly. He looked unsure, as if he wasn't certain he belonged back there. "Can I talk to you?" he asked softly. His voice held none of the smugness she had heard earlier. She tilted her head slightly, curious but calm. She didn't nod or shake her head. She simply waited. He took that as a sign to continue. "I just wanted to say that your performance was..." He paused, searching for the right word. It was different. Not different in a strange way. Different in a... He stopped again, letting out a frustrated breath. I can't explain it well, but it made me feel something. Something I haven't felt from music in a long time. Her eyes softened a little, but she didn't interrupt. I know I joked earlier, he continued, lowering his gaze. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just being stupid. I didn't think you would play something like that. He looked up again. It was beautiful. The word hung between them. She didn't smile, but her expression shifted, not warmer, but more open. Thank you, she said simply. The young man nodded slowly. Did someone teach you that piece? She hesitated. For the first time since he approached, she looked away. Her fingers tapped softly against her leg. No, she said quietly. It came from someone I once knew. He sensed the weight in her voice and didn't push for more. Instead, he sat on a nearby chair, though he wasn't sure if he was welcome to stay. She didn't ask him to leave, so he stayed still. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway felt quiet, almost peaceful. Finally, he asked, Do you play anywhere? I mean, outside events like this? She shook her head. No, I don't perform in public often. Why? She looked down at her hands again. Because the music I play isn't for crowds. Not at first. I only share it when I feel ready. He nodded slowly. He didn't understand fully, but he respected her answer. I used to think that playing fast or complicated meant I was good, he admitted quietly. But watching you play, hearing your first note, it made me realize something. He swallowed. You don't need to show off to be powerful. Her eyes lifted to his, and something in her expression softened again. Music isn't about showing off, she said. It's about feeling, and letting others feel with you. He nodded again, this time more firmly. Yeah, he whispered. I see that now. Before either of them could speak again, the host called out backstage, saying they were preparing for the final act of the night. The moment broke, but not in a harsh way. Just enough for both of them to step back into the present. The young woman stood, lifting her small bag. The young man stood too, watching her as she prepared to leave. Will you be here next time? He asked as she paused. Maybe. He wanted to ask for her name, but he stopped himself. Something told him that if she wanted him to know it, she would offer it in her own time. She walked past him gently, her footsteps soft against the floor. He didn't follow. He simply watched her leave, her presence lingering in the air like the echo of a fading note. Outside the hall, the night air wrapped around her. It was cool, but gentle, carrying the faint sounds of the city. She pulled her bag closer to her side and began walking down the quiet street. Every step felt lighter now, as if releasing the melody had lifted something heavy from her heart. She knew the memories the piece carried would always be part of her, but sharing them tonight felt like placing them into the world with purpose. As she turned a corner, she paused and looked back once, not toward the building, but toward the night sky. The stars were faint, barely visible, but she could still feel their quiet presence. She inhaled and let the breath out slowly, back inside. The young man remained near the hallway, staring at the empty space where she once stood. He didn't understand everything he felt, but he understood one thing clearly. He wanted to learn. Not to play faster, not to show off, but to feel the way she felt when she touched the keys. He walked back to his seat. This time, without the swagger he had carried earlier. His friends looked at him with confusion, but he brushed off their questions. The final performer went on stage, but he barely heard the music. His mind replayed the first note she played, the one that had stopped the entire crowd. A single sound that carried more emotion than all the fast notes he had ever practiced. He knew the next part of his journey wouldn't be about impressing others. It would be about discovering something deeper inside himself. And though he didn't know it yet, the next time their paths crossed, both of them would be different. Very different. Because the story of one night, one note, and one unexpected connection was only just beginning. The night after the event stayed with both of them longer than either expected. The young woman walked home slowly, still feeling the soft echo of the last note she played. She didn't know if her performance had changed anything for anyone. She didn't expect it to. But it had changed something inside her, a small shift. It's almost like a door opening, just a little wider. The young man, meanwhile, barely slept at all. He kept thinking about the first note she played, the way the room fell into silence, the way her music felt like it came from a place deeper than skill or practice. He had played piano for years, but that feeling, that human softness and honesty, had always slipped past him. He woke up early the next morning, driven by a strange pull inside him. He sat down at his own piano, a well-polished instrument he'd been proud of for years. His fingers rested on the keys, ready to play something fast, something impressive, something he could always rely on. But the speed felt empty now. He lifted his hands and placed them gently on the keys again, trying to play something simple, something soft. But no matter how he tried, he couldn't recreate that feeling he had heard from her. It frustrated him, but it also humbled him. For the first time in a long while, he didn't want to impress anyone. He wanted to understand. The day felt long for both of them. She spent it doing simple tasks, but her mind kept drifting back to the young man's words backstage. He hadn't tried to flatter her. He hadn't tried to take anything from her. He simply spoke with honesty, and honesty felt rare. She didn't know if their paths would cross again. She didn't expect them to. Life had taught her that people drift in and out like passing seasons. Some stay a little longer, some leave quietly. She didn't hold on to expectations, but the world had its own plans, eh? Week passed, then another and another. The hall where they had both performed held open nights twice a month. She hadn't planned on returning. She played only when she felt ready. The feeling didn't always come, but one quiet afternoon, as she walked through the city, she passed by the hall and paused. The doors were open, and inside she could hear someone practicing. The sound was soft, not perfect, not polished, but sincere. She didn't walk in. She stood outside, listening. Inside, the young man sat at the piano, playing something slow and careful. He knew she sometimes walked in the area, though he didn't know when. He hadn't seen her since that night, but he kept coming back to the hall, hoping he could understand what she had taught him without using words. Hours passed like this. Him practicing, her listening quietly from outside. She didn't reveal herself, and he didn't know she was there, but something grew in both of them, a sense of quiet connection. Even without speaking, eventually, she walked away and continued her day, her steps lighter than when she had arrived. The next open night came. People gathered again, filling the small hall with soft chatter and sleepy excitement. The young man signed up early, not because he wanted attention, but because he wanted to see how far he had grown. He didn't look around when he entered. He didn't search for her. He simply sat quietly, waiting for his turn. But she was there. She sat near the back, hands resting in her lap, calm and steady. She didn't sign up to perform this time. She simply wanted to listen to the room, to the people, to whatever stories their music carried. When the young man's name was called, stood and walked to the piano with no trace of his old swagger. The crowd expected his usual fast, showy performance, but he placed his hands gently on the keys and took a slow breath. The first note he played was soft, not perfect, not impressive, but honest. The room didn't fall silent the way it had when she played, but people leaned in, tilting their heads, curious. They could feel the shift in him, the change that came from something deeper than practice. His melody moved like someone learning to walk again, steady, slow, and human. Every now and then, he stumbled. A note didn't land quite right. A chord felt a bit heavy, but he didn't rush. He didn't try to hide the flaws. For the first time, he wasn't performing, he was sharing. The young woman watched from the back. She didn't smile, but something warmed quietly inside her. She recognized the softness in his hands, the gentleness in his pacing. He had changed. When he finished, the applause that followed wasn't loud or wild. It was warm, steady, the kind that came from people who felt something real. He stepped away from the piano, breathing deeply. As he walked down the aisle, he finally looked up and saw her. She didn't wave. She didn't nod. She simply held his gaze for a moment, and that was enough. After the event ended, people trickled out into the night. He walked outside, unsure if she would follow, but she did. They met under the warm glow of a nearby streetlight, neither of them rushing to speak. Finally, he said quietly, "I've been trying to understand how you play the way you do. Not the technique, the feeling." She listened, her expression thoughtful. He continued, "I didn't know music could come from that place. The place you played from. I never learned that part." She looked up at the sky before answering, "You learned it tonight." He gave a small, surprised breath of a laugh. "Did I?" "It didn't sound anywhere near as it sounded honest," she said gently. "And that matters more than anything else." The wind moved softly through the trees above them. A car passed in the distance. The world felt calm, as if giving them space. He lowered his voice. "Will you teach me? Not formally. Not lessons. Just help me understand what you understand." She didn't answer right away. She didn't make promises. Instead, she asked, "What are you trying to find?" He looked at the ground for a moment, then back at her. "Something real," he said. "Something human. Something I lost along the way." That answer surprised her. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. She nodded slowly. "Then yes, I can help you find that." They didn't shake hands. They didn't set schedules. They simply began walking down the quiet street together, letting the night guide their steps. The days that followed weren't filled with grand lessons or dramatic breakthroughs. Instead, they were simple. They met at the hall, sometimes sitting at separate pianos, sometimes at the same one. She didn't teach him scales or advanced runs. She taught him how to listen to the instrument, to himself, to the stories that lived inside him. He learned that music wasn't about speed. It wasn't about showing off. It's about perfection. It was about truth. And the more he learned, the more he realized how much he had been missing. Their connection grew slowly, like a melody unfolding without rush. They talked sometimes, but often they didn't need to. The piano said enough. He found parts of himself he thought he had lost. She found comfort in being understood without explanations. Weeks turned into months. Their paths didn't merge into one. Simply walked side by side, each carrying their own journey, each learning from the other. And one night, long after the hall had closed and the city had gone quiet, she played a piece she had never shared with anyone before, a piece even deeper than the one that first silenced the crowd. He listened, not as someone who wanted to impress, not as someone who doubted her, but as someone who understood. When she finished, there was no applause, just a quiet moment between two people who had changed because of a single piano note on a night neither of them expected. The world outside kept moving. But in that small room, something gentle settled into place. Their story didn't end there. It simply continued soft, honest, and real, just like the music that brought them together.